The historical relationship between ancient Egypt and Nubia is often misunderstood, with Egypt traditionally being portrayed as the unrivaled birthplace of civilization in Africa. However, a deeper understanding of these two cultures reveals that they are intrinsically linked by common cultural roots, sharing a rich heritage that traces back to the heart of Northeast Africa. Both Egypt and Nubia are part of a broader African context, where their identities were shaped by the environment, the Nile River, and the ancient peoples who populated this region. The Nile, stretching from the heart of Africa, is not only a lifeline for Egypt, but also for Nubia, the region to the south that played an equally crucial role in the formation of both societies. Nubia's historical importance has often been overshadowed by the grandeur of Egypt, but it is increasingly understood that Nubia was not merely a background to Egypt's rise, but a foundational force that helped shape the Egyptian civilization. The Egyptians, like the Nubians, were indigenous to Northeast Africa, and their civilizations emerged from the same African roots, both tracing their origins to the ancient peoples who had lived in the Nile Valley for thousands of years. These early African societies, which included the Nubians, Egyptians, and others along the Nile, shared not only geographical proximity, but also cultural practices, religious beliefs, and technological innovations. Both the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Nubians can be described as descendants of Northeast African indigenous populations, whose identities and civilizations were shaped by Africa itself. As one scholar remarked, all of these people are Africans, emphasizing that their cultures, their ways of life, and their civilizations were formed in Africa, with any mixing that occurred taking place on African soil. The Egyptians did not come from anywhere else other than the Nile Valley, and their cultural identity, including their religious and political systems, was firmly grounded in African traditions. What made Egypt famous, however, was not its being the first civilization to emerge in Africa, but rather its ability to preserve its records in stone, something that no other African civilization had done to the same extent. This was a key factor in Egypt's prominence in historical narratives. The famous discovery of the Rosetta Stone, for example, unlocked the mysteries of Egyptian hieroglyphs and allowed historians to decode the language of Egypt, making it one of the best documented civilizations in history. In contrast, Nubia, despite its importance, did not have the same preservation of written records, which is one of the reasons why its role in African history has often been overlooked. Yet, it is crucial to understand that Nubia's influence on Egypt is undeniable, as the two cultures shared many of the same cultural and religious foundations. The rise of Egypt, with its grand monuments and vast empire, did not occur in a vacuum. It was shaped by centuries of interaction with Nubia, which had already established itself as a powerful and sophisticated civilization by the time Egypt began to rise in prominence. The early Egyptians themselves acknowledged their roots in Nubia, with Egyptian inscriptions from as far back as the Second Dynasty claiming that the Egyptians originated from the southern regions of the Nile, where the happy god dwells at the foothills of the mountain. This acknowledgement of Nubia as the source of Egyptian civilization is important because it highlights the interconnectedness of these two ancient cultures. The Egyptians, for all their grandeur and achievements, were not the first civilization to rise along the Nile. Nubia, with its early advanced societies, predates Egypt in many ways and should be recognized as the foundational civilization upon which Egypt was built. The kingdom of Kush, which emerged in Nubia, played a key role in shaping Egypt's religious practices, political structures, and even its military strategies. The cultural and religious exchanges between Nubia and Egypt were constant, with Nubian gods being adopted by the Egyptians, and Nubian rulers often taking Egyptian titles and adopting Egyptian religious practices. The earliest Egyptian records referred to the Nubians as the people of the south, emphasizing the role of Nubia as a cultural and political center that influenced Egypt long before Egypt's rise to power. It is also important to note that the term Egypt itself did not exist in the early period of Egyptian history. The ancient Egyptians referred to their land as Kemet, meaning the Black Land, a reference to the fertile soil of the Nile Valley. The concept of Egypt as a unified state came much later, and by that time, the civilization that became known as Egypt had already been heavily influenced by Nubian culture. The Greeks, in their writings, played a significant role in shaping how Egypt was viewed by the outside world. The Greeks, who arrived in Egypt during the Ptolemaic period, often wrote about Egypt as though it were a singular entity, separate from the African continent. This Greek perspective of Egypt, combined with later Roman and European colonial narratives, has contributed to the erasure of Nubia's significant role in African history. The history of Nubia, however, predates Egypt's dynastic period and should be viewed as the mother civilization of Egypt. Before Egypt became the Egypt we know today, it was Nubia that ruled much of the Nile Valley, establishing early kingdoms that would later influence Egyptian culture and governance. The Nubian state of Tasseti, for example, was a powerful kingdom that predated the dynastic Egypt we recognize today. This early Nubian kingdom laid the foundations for Egyptian civilization, yet it is rarely mentioned in the mainstream historical accounts of ancient Africa. It is important to note that the history of Egypt is often studied through a Greco-Roman lens, with a heavy emphasis on the artifacts and writings of the Greeks and Romans. This Eurocentric approach to Egyptian history has led to the marginalization of Nubia's contributions to Egyptian civilization. The Greeks, for example, are often credited with introducing civilization to Egypt. But in reality, the Greeks learned much of what they knew about governance, architecture, and religion from the Egyptians, who in turn learned from the Nubians. The Greeks themselves were heavily influenced by Egyptian culture, particularly in their early religious practices and their adoption of Egyptian architectural styles. Despite these influences, the dominant historical narrative has been shaped by Greek and later Roman interpretations of Egyptian history, which has led to a distortion of the true origins of Egyptian civilization. Nubia's role in Egypt's development cannot be overstated. Nubian rulers, such as Pianki, Taharqa, and Shabaka, played a crucial role in shaping Egypt's dynastic history. Nubia's influence on Egypt's religious practices, artistic traditions, and political structures is still visible in Egyptian monuments and artifacts. The Nubian rulers of the 25th dynasty, for example, are often credited with revitalizing Egypt's declining power during the Third Intermediate Period, bringing much-needed stability to the region. It is essential, therefore, to acknowledge Nubia as the mother civilization of Egypt. Just as Ethiopia is the mother of Nubia and Somalia, Uganda, and Kenya represent the larger African cultural and spiritual family from which Egypt emerged. The narrative of Egyptian civilization should no longer be told in isolation, divorced from its African roots. Egypt was not the first great civilization to emerge in Africa, but it was the most documented, and it owes much of its greatness to the cultural and political contributions of Nubia. The history of Egypt is incomplete without the story of Nubia, and it is time for this truth to be acknowledged and celebrated in our understanding of African history. The future of African scholarship rests on reclaiming these forgotten histories, recognizing the interconnectedness of Africa's past, and telling the story of ancient Egypt in its full, unvarnished glory. Through the lens of Nubia, we can finally understand Egypt not as a singular achievement, but as part of the rich tapestry of African civilizations that have shaped the world's history. Nubia, a region of immense historical and cultural importance, lies to the south of Egypt. Nestled between the first and sixth cataracts of the Nile River, while Egypt often dominates the historical narrative of ancient Africa. The rise of Nubia and its advanced civilization must not be overlooked. Nubia, known for its rich culture, powerful kingdoms, and strategic location along the Nile, played a pivotal role in shaping the history of Northeast Africa. The earliest known inhabitants of Nubia, like those of Egypt, were part of the larger indigenous African population that emerged in the fertile Nile Valley. Unlike Egypt, which would eventually become the most renowned civilization of the ancient world, Nubia's contributions were often overshadowed, both historically and in modern scholarship. However, it is now being increasingly acknowledged that Nubia was not only as ancient as Egypt, but also played an instrumental role in the development of the Egyptian state and its cultural, religious, and political systems. The first Nubian kingdom, Tasseti, emerged in the Nile Valley long before Egypt's unification under Narmer-Menes. As one of the earliest Nubian kingdoms, Tasseti was located in the region of what is now southern Egypt and northern Sudan. The kingdom of Tasseti was known for its warrior culture and its kings, often referred to as the kings of the bow, were formidable military leaders. They played an important role in Egypt's early history by maintaining control over trade routes and interacting with Egypt's dynastic rulers. The influence of Tasseti on the formation of Egyptian civilization is undeniable, with numerous Egyptian inscriptions attesting to the relationship between the two regions. The importance of Nubia in the development of Egyptian culture is also evident in the archaeological evidence found in both Egypt and Nubia, Nubian art and material. Culture greatly influenced Egyptian artistic traditions, particularly in terms of pottery, sculpture, and religious iconography. The kingdom of Tasseti's warrior elites, skilled in archery, were recognized for their ability to defend their territory and maintain control of the region's trade routes. This allowed them to establish a prosperous and influential society. which later set the stage for the rise of the Kingdom of Kush. The Kingdom of Kush, often considered the most powerful and influential Nubian state, emerged as the successor to Tusseti and played a central role in shaping Nubian history. Kush, located to the south of Egypt, spanned across modern-day Sudan and Ethiopia. The Kingdom of Kush became a dominant political and military force in the region, controlling vital trade routes and resources. Its rulers, known as the Kings of Kush, wielded significant power and maintained strong connections with their Egyptian neighbors. Kush's rise to prominence was marked by the establishment of powerful dynasties, most notably the 25th dynasty of Egypt, also known as the Nubian dynasty. The emergence of the Kingdom of Kush was a turning point in both Nubian and Egyptian history, as it marked the beginning of a long period of political and cultural influence from Nubia over Egypt. During this period, the Kushite kings would rule over Egypt and restore Egypt's former glory. The 25th dynasty of Egypt, which lasted from the 8th to the 7th century BCE, was founded by the Kushite pharaoh Pianki Pi. Pianki's military conquests and political prowess led to the reunification of Egypt, which had been divided into multiple smaller kingdoms following the fall of the new kingdom. Pianki's victory over the Libyan rulers of Egypt and his subsequent coronation as the Pharaoh of Egypt marked the beginning of Nubian dominance in Egypt. The Kushite pharaohs, including Pianki, Shabaka, and Taharka, would go on to rule Egypt for several generations, leaving a lasting impact on Egyptian culture and governance. During the reign of Taharka, Nubia's influence on Egypt reached its peak. Taharka was not only a powerful military leader, but also a patron of the arts, religion, and architecture. His reign saw the construction of monumental buildings, temples, and pyramids that reflected the influence of Nubian culture on Egyptian society. The Kushite kings, through their rule over Egypt, brought with them their religious beliefs, which included the worship of Nubian gods such as Amen, the chief god of the Kingdom of Kush. These religious practices were absorbed into the Egyptian pantheon, further intertwining the two civilizations. The religious and cultural influence of Nubia on Egypt was profound and enduring, with Nubian practices and deities being integrated into Egyptian religious life. One of the most significant examples of this influence is the worship of the god Amen, who was originally a Nubian deity but became one of the most important gods in the Egyptian pantheon. The Kushite rulers, particularly during the 25th dynasty, emphasized the worship of Amen and associated themselves with the god, solidifying their religious legitimacy in the eyes of the Egyptian people. The Kushite kings also promoted the cult of Osiris, the Egyptian god of the afterlife, and integrated Nubian spiritual beliefs with Egyptian religious traditions. Nubia's role in Egypt's spiritual development cannot be understated. While Egypt is often associated with monumental religious structures such as the pyramids and the Sphinx, it was in Nubia that many of the religious and architectural traditions that would later define Egypt were first developed. The Nubians, with their advanced knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering, played a significant role in the design and construction of Egypt's grand temples and pyramids. The architectural achievements of the Nubians, particularly in the construction of pyramids and temples, set the stage for the architectural wonders of Egypt. In addition to their architectural and religious contributions, the Nubians also had a profound impact on Egyptian military strategy. The Kushites were known for their military prowess, particularly their skill in archery, and they played a key role in the defense of Egypt during the 25th dynasty. The Nubian archers were highly sought after by the Egyptian pharaohs, and their military tactics were adopted by the Egyptians in battle. This exchange of military knowledge between Nubia and Egypt further strengthened their cultural and political ties. The reign of the Kushite pharaohs in Egypt also saw a resurgence in the power and prestige of the Egyptian state. The Nubian rulers of the 25th dynasty brought stability and unity to a fragmented Egypt. And their reign is often considered a golden age in Egyptian history. Under the Kushite pharaohs, Egypt experienced a revival in art, literature, and religious practices, as well as a renewed sense of national pride. The reign of Taharqa, in particular, is remembered for his efforts to restore Egypt's temples and monuments, many of which had fallen into disrepair during the period of foreign rule. The Kushite rulers of the 25th dynasty also promoted the idea of Pan-African unity, emphasizing the shared heritage of Egypt, Nubia, and the broader African continent. This vision of unity was reflected in their political and cultural policies, which sought to integrate Nubian and Egyptian traditions into a single cohesive identity. The Nubian kings of the 25th dynasty are often seen as the embodiment of African unity and pride, as they worked to restore the ancient glory of Egypt while maintaining their Nubian heritage. Nubia's influence on Egypt was not limited to the political and military spheres. The two civilizations shared a common linguistic heritage, with Nubian and Egyptian languages belonging to the same Afroasiatic language family. Many of the Egyptian hieroglyphs used to record the history and culture of Egypt have parallels in Nubian script, further illustrating the linguistic ties between the two regions. The Nubians also contributed to the development of Egyptian literature, including religious texts, hymns, and poetry. Despite the eventual decline of the Nubian kingdom of Kush and the rise of other powers in the region, Nubia's legacy in Egypt remains undeniable. The influence of Nubia on Egypt's political, cultural, and religious life shaped the course of ancient history and left an indelible mark on the civilization of Egypt. Today, as we continue to uncover the history of these ancient peoples, it is clear that Nubia's role in the rise of Egypt is just as vital as Egypt's contributions to the broader history of Africa and the world. The relationship between Egypt and Nubia was one of profound influence, mutual exchange, and at times, conflict. While Egypt has often been seen as the dominant civilization in ancient Africa, it is important to recognize that its power and culture were deeply shaped by its interactions with Nubia, a region to the south that played a crucial role in both the cultural and political development of Egypt. The historical connection between Egypt and Nubia can be traced back to the earliest days of Egyptian civilization. Long before Egypt established its famous dynasties, Nubia's position along the Nile River, particularly the regions near the First and Second Cataracts, made it a vital partner in trade, politics, and military strategy. The Egyptian and Nubian peoples shared a common cultural heritage that was shaped by their proximity to the Nile. But their interactions were often complicated, with periods of peaceful coexistence, intense rivalry, and outright conflict. This dynamic relationship has left a lasting mark on both civilizations, shaping their development for millennia. In the early periods, the relationship between Egypt and Nubia was primarily centered around trade and cultural exchange. Nubia, rich in natural resources such as gold, ivory, and precious stones, was an essential trading partner for Egypt. The decline of Egypt as a dominant power in the ancient world marked a pivotal moment in the history of Northeast Africa. The once mighty civilization that had built pyramids developed a sophisticated system of governance and established its cultural and religious practices as the model for much of the ancient world was in a state of deterioration by the time the Nubians began to rise in power. While Egypt had dominated the Nile Valley for centuries, its decline was inevitable, owing to a complex mix of internal strife, foreign invasions, and political instability. It was during this time of weakening Egyptian power that Nubia, specifically the Kingdom of Kushi, merged as the principal force that would shape the future of the region. The fall of Egypt's new kingdom around 1070 BCE, following the death of its last great pharaohs, was the beginning of a period of fragmentation and decline. Egypt, which had once stood as the epitome of stability and prosperity, was divided into smaller, less powerful kingdoms. The central authority that had once ruled from Thebes had all but disappeared, and Egypt entered a period known as the Third Intermediate Period, which saw numerous foreign invasions and internal conflicts. During this period, Egypt's political control over its territory weakened significantly, leaving a power vacuum that other regional powers, particularly Nubia, would eventually fill. While Egypt's elite dynasties lost power, the Kingdom of Kush in Nubia rose to prominence. Nubia, a region known for its rich cultural heritage and warrior traditions, was a constant source of power and influence to the south of Egypt. The Nubians had long been in contact with Egypt, and their cultural, military, and religious influence had been steadily growing over the centuries. The Nubians were the neighbors of the Egyptians, and although Egypt's rulers often sought to maintain control over Nubia, the Nubians had their own rich history, which was now coming to the forefront. By the time of the 25th dynasty, Nubian rulers had become powerful enough to take control of Egypt, and this marked a significant turning point in the history of the region. The rise of the Kushite pharaohs in Egypt was not an isolated event, but rather the culmination of centuries of cultural exchange and political competition between the two civilizations. The 25th dynasty of Egypt, often referred to as the Nubian dynasty, was the period when Nubian kings ruled as pharaohs of Egypt. The first of these Nubian pharaohs was Pianki Pi, who launched a military campaign in the 8th century BCE to reunite Egypt, which had become fragmented after the collapse of the new kingdom. Pianki's military prowess and political acumen allowed him to conquer Egypt and restore order to the Nile Valley. In his inscriptions, Pianki described how he triumphed over the various Egyptian factions that were vying for power, stating, that he was chosen by the gods to bring peace and order to Egypt. Pianki's conquest of Egypt was not merely a military victory. It was a cultural and spiritual revival for Egypt as well. The Kushite rulers were deeply invested in the religious and cultural practices of ancient Egypt. And when they took control of the country, they worked to restore Egypt's ancient glory. Pianki and his successors, including Shabaka and Taharka, sought to reinvigorate the Egyptian religious traditions. And they played a significant role in the restoration and rebuilding of Egypt's temples and monuments. One of the most important aspects of the Kushite rule in Egypt was the religious revival that took place under the Nubian pharaohs. The Kushite rulers, who were devout followers of the Egyptian gods, emphasized the importance of the worship of Amun, the chief god of the Egyptian pantheon. The Nubians, who had their own religious practices, adopted the Egyptian religious system and became fervent supporters of Egyptian spiritual life. The worship of Amun became a central part of the political legitimacy of the Nubian pharaohs, and they worked to restore the grand temples dedicated to Amun, including the temple at Karnak in Thebes. The Kushites' deep devotion to Egyptian religious practices was symbolic of the broader cultural and spiritual influence that Nubia had on Egypt. The 25th dynasty saw a flourishing of Egyptian religious and cultural traditions. And the Nubians were not only restoring Egypt's temples and monuments, but also playing a vital role in the propagation of Egyptian spirituality throughout the region. In addition to their religious revival, the Kushite pharaohs were also instrumental in restoring Egypt's artistic traditions. During the time of the New Kingdom, Egypt had been a dominant cultural force, producing exquisite works of art and monumental architecture. However, by the time of the 25th dynasty, much of Egypt's artistic heritage had been lost or neglected. The Nubian pharaohs, recognizing the importance of maintaining Egypt's artistic legacy, patronized the arts and ensured the continued production of Egyptian-style sculptures, paintings, and jewelry. This revival of artistic production was crucial in preserving Egypt's cultural identity during a time of political instability. The Kushite rulers, particularly Taharka, were known for their support of the arts, and under their rule, Egypt saw the construction of monumental statues, reliefs, and temples that would leave a lasting mark on the cultural landscape of the ancient world. Despite the cultural and religious revival brought about by the Nubian kings, the political and military challenges of ruling Egypt were immense. The Nubian pharaohs faced constant threats from foreign invaders, including the growing power of the Assyrians in the Near East. The Assyrians, a rising empire, viewed Egypt as a valuable prize and sought to expand their influence over the Nile Valley. In 664 BCE, the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal launched a military campaign against Egypt, defeating the Nubian forces at the Battle of Memphis. This victory marked the end of the Kushite dynasty in Egypt, as the Nubian pharaohs were driven out and Egypt fell under the control of the Assyrians. Despite the Assyrian conquest, Nubia continued to be a vital cultural and political force in the region, although the 25th dynasty came to an end. The Kushites retained their power in Nubia, and the kingdom of Kush continued to flourish as a regional power. The fall of the Nubian dynasty in Egypt was a turning point, but it was not the end of Nubia's influence on the region. Even after the defeat of the Nubian rulers in Egypt, Nubia remained an important cultural center, and its religious, artistic, and military traditions continued to influence Egypt and the surrounding areas. The Kushites played a key role in the ongoing development of the Egyptian civilization. Even after their removal from the Nile Valley, the legacy of the Nubian rulers, especially their religious and cultural influence, remained a central part of Egyptian life for centuries to come. The rise of Nubian influence in Egypt, particularly during the 25th dynasty, serves as a powerful reminder of the interconnectedness of African civilizations. The relationship between Egypt and Nubia was not one of simple domination, but rather a complex exchange of cultural, religious, and political ideas that shaped the history of both regions. The Nubian rulers who rose to power in Egypt brought with them their own traditions, beliefs, and practices, which were seamlessly integrated into Egyptian society. This cultural exchange between Nubia and Egypt was not a one-way process, but rather a mutual exchange that enriched both civilizations. The fall of the Nubian dynasty in Egypt marked the end of an era, but it also paved the way for new dynasties and civilizations to emerge in the Nile Valley. Nubia's contributions to the cultural, religious, and political development of Egypt cannot be overstated. And its legacy continues to influence the modern understanding of ancient African civilizations. Nubia's rise to power in Egypt during the 25th dynasty was a momentous event in the history of both regions, and it is essential to acknowledge the lasting impact that the Nubians had on the course of Egyptian history. The relationship between Egypt and Nubia was one of mutual respect and shared heritage. And it is this connection that has shaped the history of Northeast Africa for thousands of years. In reflecting on the history of Egypt and Nubia, it is crucial to understand that these civilizations were not isolated entities, but part of a larger African cultural landscape. The decline of Egypt and the rise of Nubian influence was a natural consequence of the complex and dynamic interactions between the two regions, and it serves as a testament to the enduring power of African civilizations in shaping the world's history. Nubia's enduring influence on Egypt and the broader African continent continues to resonate through the ages. While the rise and fall of powerful empires have marked the course of history, the cultural, spiritual, and political contributions of Nubia remain integral to the shaping of Egyptian civilization and the African heritage at large. As we reflect on the story of Egypt and Nubia, it is essential to acknowledge the profound impact that Nubian civilization had, not only on Egypt, but also on the development of African identity as a whole. The intertwined histories of Egypt and Nubia have left an indelible mark on the entire African continent, one that reverberates through modern times. Though Nubia's role has often been marginalized in traditional historical narratives, there has been a growing recognition of its importance in recent decades. The history of Nubia is increasingly being uncovered, and its contributions to Egyptian civilization and the wider world are finally receiving the attention they deserve. From the earliest periods of Egyptian history, when the kingdom of Taseti laid the groundwork for what would later become Egypt, to the monumental achievements of the kingdom of Kush and the Nubian dynasty that ruled Egypt during the 25th dynasty. Nubia has played a central role in shaping the civilizations of Northeast Africa. The most enduring legacy of Nubia in Egypt lies in the 25th dynasty, during which the Nubian kings, especially Pianki-Pi, Shabaka, and Taharka, took the reins of Egyptian leadership, uniting a fragmented Egypt and revitalizing the ancient traditions that had been lost in the wake of foreign domination. The Nubian kings of this era were not just conquerors. They were cultural and religious restorers. They recognized the rich spiritual and cultural heritage of Egypt and sought to revive it. The Nubian rulers made significant contributions to Egypt's architectural, artistic, and religious heritage, breathing new life into a civilization that had been teetering on the brink of decline. Under the leadership of Pianki, the Kushite dynasty succeeded in reuniting Egypt after a long period of division and foreign rule. Pianki's victory over the Libyan-dominated Egyptian kingdoms solidified Nubian power in Egypt. His inscriptions on the victory stela describe his campaign to restore the ancient practices of Egypt and bring order to a fractured society. Pianki's victory was not just military, it was cultural. He emphasized the restoration of Egypt's ancient gods, most notably Amun, and worked to restore Egypt's sacred temples, many of which had fallen into disrepair during the period of foreign occupation. Taharka, Pianki's successor, is one of the most celebrated rulers of the 25th dynasty. He is often credited with bringing stability and prosperity to Egypt during his reign, which lasted for many years. Not only did he focus on restoring Egypt's monumental architecture, but he also revived Egypt's religious traditions. Under Taharka's rule, the temples of Ammon and Karnak and Thebes were restored, and the great pyramids of Egypt were given new attention and care. Taharka's reign marked a golden age for Egypt. Where the arts flourished, religious rituals were reinvigorated, and Egypt's political stability was re-established under Nubian guidance. Even after the fall of the 25th dynasty due to the Assyrian invasion, the Nubian influence on Egypt remained potent. Nubia had already embedded itself into the religious, artistic, and political fabric of Egyptian life. The Kushite dynasty had laid the foundation for Egypt's future renaissance, with a lasting legacy in the arts, religion, and governance. One of the most profound aspects of Nubian influence on Egypt was the introduction and integration of Nubian religious practices into Egyptian spirituality. The Nubians had a long tradition of worshiping gods associated with fertility, nature, and the afterlife. These beliefs found their way into Egyptian religious practices, creating a unique blend of Nubian and Egyptian spirituality. The worship of Ammon, the supreme Egyptian god, was heavily influenced by Nubian religious traditions, as the Kushite rulers of Egypt adopted Ammon as their patron god. The Nubian Amun, who was often portrayed as a figure of great power and wisdom, became the focal point of Egyptian religious life during the 25th dynasty. In addition to Amun, other Nubian deities, such as Menli, were incorporated into the Egyptian pantheon. Menli, a god associated with the afterlife and resurrection, is revered by the Nubians long before being adopted by the Egyptians. The integration of Nubian deities into the Egyptian religious system reflects the deep spiritual exchange between the two civilizations. This integration was not just a matter of adopting foreign gods, but rather a merging of beliefs and practices that enriched both cultures. The Nubian influence on Egyptian religion also extended to funerary practices. The use of the pyramid as a burial structure, which was first developed in Nubia, was adopted by the Egyptians. The Kushite kings, who were buried in pyramids in Nubia, brought this tradition to Egypt, where the most famous pyramids of the New Kingdom were constructed. The pyramid complex at Giza, which became one of the most iconic symbols of Egyptian civilization, was built on earlier Nubian architectural ideas. The Egyptians did not simply adopt these structures. They adapted them, incorporating their own religious beliefs and practices. While Nubia's influence on Egypt is well documented, its cultural impact extended far beyond the borders of Egypt. Nubia's location along the Nile River made it a crossroads for trade and cultural exchange, and its influence can be seen in regions as far south as Ethiopia, Uganda, and even Kenya. The Kingdom of Kush was a powerful political entity in its own right and exercised considerable influence over neighboring regions. The Kushites not only shaped Egypt, but also had a lasting impact on other parts of Africa. The Kingdom of Kush, which lasted for over 1,000 years, was a hub of trade and culture, exchanging goods such as gold, ivory, and exotic animals with distant lands. The people of Kush were skilled in metallurgy, and their weapons and tools were highly prized throughout Africa and the Near East. The Kingdom of Kush's military might was also legendary, with its warrior culture and sophisticated archery techniques contributing to the success of Nubian armies. Nubian culture was a melting pot of African traditions, combining indigenous practices with influences from Egypt, the Near East, and sub-Saharan Africa. Nubian art, pottery, and jewelry are some of the finest examples of African craftsmanship, blending Egyptian styles with unique Nubian elements. These artifacts not only serve as a testament to the skill of the Nubian people, but also as a record of their cultural exchange with Egypt and other neighboring civilizations. Nubia's influence extended beyond the realm of religion and trade. It also played a vital role in the development of African unity. The idea of Pan-Africanism, which emerged in the 20th century, has roots in the shared history of African civilizations. The Nubian rulers, especially during the 25th dynasty, promoted the idea of African unity by emphasizing the common heritage of Egypt, Nubia, and the wider African continent. This vision of unity was evident in the political and cultural policies of the Kushite kings, who sought to integrate Nubian and Egyptian traditions into a single, cohesive identity. The Nubian kings of the 25th dynasty saw themselves as the rightful heirs to the great Egyptian civilization and worked to restore its ancient glory. In doing so, they not only revitalized Egypt but also laid the groundwork for the future of African unity. Their reign marked a period of cultural flourishing, where the arts, religion, and governance were revived. And Egypt was once again a powerful force in the ancient world. Today, Nubia's legacy is being rediscovered. As scholars and historians continue to explore the profound contributions of the Nubian civilization to African and world history. For centuries, Nubia's role in the rise of Egypt and the broader African cultural landscape has been overlooked or minimized. But as we continue to uncover the true history of Nubia, it becomes clear that Nubia was not just a peripheral civilization, but a central force in shaping the ancient world. The Nubian kings and queens, with their military, cultural, and religious contributions, laid the foundation for Egypt's greatness and for the development of African civilization as a whole in recent years. There has been a resurgence of interest in Nubian history, with a growing movement to reclaim the African narrative and recognize the contributions of Nubian civilization. This movement is part of a broader effort to challenge the Eurocentric historical narratives that have long dominated the study of African history. By reclaiming the Nubian legacy, we can better understand the interconnectedness of African civilizations and appreciate the shared cultural heritage that binds Egypt, Nubia, and the rest of Africa. The Nubian legacy is not just confined to ancient history. It continues to shape African identity today. From the ancient pyramids of Nubia to the modern-day struggles for African unity and self-determination, the legacy of Nubia remains a vital part of the African experience. As we move forward, it is essential to continue exploring and celebrating the contributions of Nubia to the history of Africa and the world, ensuring that this once overlooked civilization takes its rightful place in the global narrative.